Hello, everyone. I'm Dominique.
And I'm Christina, and we are the Connected in Glass podcast.
Every week, we will feature interviews with glass artists who speak to their creative processes and overcoming challenges.
These conversations are real and raw. We hope that by sharing these stories, you're able to find some connection and know that you're not alone.
We just wanted to take a moment to thank you for listening to our podcast. We're super passionate about this project and work for hours every week to bring you this content. So if you'd like to help support us, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/connectedinglass. Also, please consider joining our Facebook group, Connected in Glass Community, where we continue the conversations from these episodes. We'd love to hear from you.
This episode of Connected in Glass is sponsored by Diddy Clips. Diddy Clips has changed the way we film our glassblowing videos, and we're proud to be working with them. Today, we're interviewing Carrie Strope. She's a glass artist based in Lincoln, Nebraska, who has been working with glass since 2005.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, ladies. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We're so excited to get to know you. At first, we want to know a little bit about where you live, what you enjoy besides glass, and then get us into the story of how you started working with glass.
Okay. Well, I'm based in Lincoln, Nebraska. So I live here. I have 3 different studios that I access here. I have my home studio. I have a hot glass studio at Lincoln Hot Glass. And then I also have, my studio, the studios that other people have that I also get to use, right? And then another studio locally, Architectural Glass Arts, that does stained glass, fused glass, mosaics. They mainly focus on stained glass church commissions and whatnot, and I run the classes for them. So that's like my third studio. And I'm teaching a lot of classes currently because it's the holiday season. So lots of fused glass snowflakes, fused glass Christmas trees and wreaths. Like that's like my whole life this week is that, except for this evening, I have a soccer game. So I grew up playing soccer, and that is like my one, that and a dance group that I go to is my form of exercise, because I don't like working out for the sake of working out. So there has to be an end goal. So that's kind of what I do. And aside from that, like, what do I like besides glass? My cat. How's that? Like, glass is pretty much all consuming for me. And I think a lot of glass artists understand that because it is slightly addicting. And, part of my love of glass is just learning as much about it as possible. So when I first started working in glass, I worked at a studio in Napa. And actually, I didn't really work there. First of all, I found a couple of classes through the junior college in the area there. I found a blown glass paperweight class, and I ended up taking that twice because it was like, seriously, it was an experience that I'd never had before. And the teacher was really engaging, and they were small classes, and it was just so much fun to play with fire and melty glass. And then the other class that I found was a fused glass class at my local studio there. And that was 5 minutes from my house. So like, as soon as I found those 2 classes, I was pretty well hooked and just kept going back to the one studio. I went back and, I wanted to help out as much as possible. I wanted to be there, but I didn't know anything. So like what I could do was sweep up and dust and help out around the studio as far as that was concerned. And then, the more you get into teaching classes and you're working on your projects and student projects, you don't necessarily, the thrill of cleaning and loading the kiln disappears after a while. So I was brand new, and I was all about that. So I took over loading the kilns for the lady there really quickly, and then started helping her teach beginner classes, and then just kind of never left. So really, since then, my life has been pretty much about glass.
Cool. So continue the story from there. So you started helping teach beginner classes, and did you just keep learning from that same person, or did you branch out another?
Pretty much. I took the beginning. So the paperweight class, I took that twice back to back. And then the furnace artist, he needed help around pumpkin season, because you can you can set yourself up with a hot shop where you can work individually, but it's always going to be easier if you have another person helping you. So I kind of became his apprentice and started working in his hot shop, and I would help him. I would prepare the stem of the pumpkin while he prepared the actual, the blown glass portion of the pumpkin, and then we'd stick those together. And then after a few hours of doing that, I got to play in the pot. So I got to play with hot glass there. And then at the other studio, she offered classes in bead making on map gas torches. She offered stained glass, she offered mosaics, fused glass, and I was just like, well, I don't want to do any of that. I want to do fused glass because fused glass is cool, But in order to be there, I kind of needed to know all the techniques. And I'm so glad that I did learn all these techniques, because the more techniques that you have, the greater your vocabulary and your toolbox grows with what you can say and do with glass. So yeah, anytime she had a class, I would take the class. I didn't really get paid to be there, but I did get, discounts on glass, and I learned a lot from her. And then, her beginning class was structured so much more differently than any of the beginning classes that I've seen since then, because you actually explored glass and got to do various things. You explored firing temperatures, and we did casting of glass and sculpting. And, we did all sorts of really cool things in that beginning class that I think, I've tried to structure beginning classes like that since then, but it seems like there's just not, the interest isn't there. People just want to make something. So they have to make something before they want to actually understand what they're doing, is what I found, at least in Nebraska, in my community. But yeah, so I started teaching some of those beginning classes and freeing up some of her time. And I would go in and help her. She was a transcription artist. So there's an artist in Napa Valley, Gordon Huther, who owns a really big, it's a huge barn now, and he works on public projects basically. And he'll design the project, he'll go out and get the work, and then he has people that work for him that figure out how to make it, how to make what he wants out of glass, how to physically do it. So she was working for Gordon Huther, and then had her own studio after, moved out of his studio and had her own studio, so she could control the variables of everything, because a lot of what she was doing was painting on glass. And if you're painting on glass, the traditional style of stained glass painting, it's not permanent until it gets fired in. And so she would lay out everything that, she was working on. And, there's a story where he came in and he was like, oh, this is really cool, and would touch it. And then it's just you just ruined all of that work. So she wanted to kind of control her workspace. But so I would go in and help her when she had projects like that. So I learned a lot, about UV gluing pieces, about sandblasting pieces. She used to have a contract where she made these huge lighting things. She would get the lighting from this company, and then she would apply the lead paint and fire it on, and then it would go back to them. So she had a very she was very safety minded, and had an area in the studio where this is where all the lead quarantines, and she had a suit on and all of that. So I'm glad that I learned in that situation, because I did learn a lot about how to be safe with glass, versus some of the studios that I go in where it's kind of a blasé attitude, oh yeah, it's just lead. Oh yeah, blah, blah, and it's not just lead, or, it's not blah, blah. You should definitely be safe, but yeah.
Can you describe what your style of work is? So it sounds like you kind of worked with all these other artists and you help them with their style, but can you describe what your work is, or maybe what it's evolved through, if it's ever changing?
But yeah, so a lot of what I do tends to be flowers. I was a horticulture major, so I studied a lot about, horticulture, plants, insects, all of this and that. And so a lot of what I do is kind of influenced by that, but also a lot of times by quilting as well. So quilting is really big in the Midwest, and my mom was a quilter. So I got into quilting for a little while, but it was much quicker and easier to actually make quilts out of glass. So a lot of times I'll do kind of quilted pieces, and then anything that's flowers, mandalas a lot. I really like not necessarily symmetry, because sometimes it's an odd number of petals or whatever, but there is a radial symmetry that goes on. And I really like the mandalas. When I first started in glass, it was 2005, and my mom had been diagnosed with cancer, but I didn't live in Nebraska at the time. So a lot of my processing took place by keeping busy and just the meditative aspect of working with glass. So a lot of my patterns tend to be very symmetrical and floral based.
And where do you find inspiration for these pieces? And how do you go from that inspiration to what you're creating?
Well, that's a good question. It kind of depends on the overall project. So a lot of times I'll have projects in mind. Like currently, the glass fashion show that happened in Murano, I made a dress for that. That's Laura Donifer's glass fashion show at the Glass Art Society. So she organizes this fashion show every few years at the Glass Art Society. And the most recent one has been postponed a couple times. I'm kind of not thinking it's going to happen to Tacoma again, but that means we all have plenty of time to continue to build our glassy creations, right? So I made a corset that was mosaic glass, and I want to make a headdress and some more that goes with it. So I have these ideas. I've kind of sketched them out a little bit, and now I've been making parts because I know what I'm going to need. And so I kind of play with parts until I can put them together and figure that aspect out. So when I'm coming up with ideas, a lot of times I'll sketch it, but then I'm very tactile in that I really need that the pieces and parts to play with before I can start to work that through in my head, because it ends up being kind of a three-dimensional design. And sometimes it's really hard to sketch three-dimensional items, 2D, and figure out how they're going to come together. So like that's one project I'm working on. When I'm approached about a commission, a lot of times I'll listen to what the person wants, what the client wants, and then work through my head, but to see, one, if there's any techniques that I want to explore that I've been working with that I want to push further, and then kind of sketch those and figure that out from there. So like there was a rose window that I was commissioned to do a few years back. It was a rose window for Rose. So this family, their grandmother was called Rosemary, but she really liked roses. So they bought me like these silk roses as kind of like, as these are the colors that we like, and this is kind of what we were thinking of, but do whatever from there. So I kind of looked at the roses and sketched it a couple different ways that I thought they could go together, and ended up doing kind of a mandala, because a rose window is that circular window that does have very symmetrical, things going on. But I changed it so that it didn't have all of the geometrics that were going on necessarily, but made it into several different roses that were in the rose window format. Anyway, so I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's part of how I do it. And then a lot of the designs that I come up with, like say lately I've been on the torch and kind of encasing these eye millie, right? So I've got all of these eye millies that I want to use. So I've got some little stained glass pieces that are kind of floral, but I want to take the eye and put those in the middle. So, I kind of came up with some of those, and then just kind of evolving some of the same patterns and ideas to incorporate new materials. I mean, not necessarily material because it's all typically glass, but new accents or whatever, new bits.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the different mindsets that it takes to do the different things you do, like doing creative work that you're inspired by, like commissions, working for other people, and like also teaching all those. How do you approach all those different parts?
Well, I have a calendar, and I offload as much as I can onto that calendar, because I there's so much going in there's so much in my head at all times, because I do have so many different things that I'm working on at any one time. So my calendar really helps to keep me organized. And then I've got separate email accounts for a bunch of these too, so that I can kind of help keep things organized that way. But yeah, I mean, like currently I'm not getting a lot of work done for me because it's full on holiday mode at the studio. And these holiday classes, if you have a space to teach holiday classes, that's going to make you like that seriously, November, December, lots of money if you can just figure out holiday classes, because people want to come in and they want to make presents for people. It's the same thing at the Lincoln Hot Glass. I don't teach those classes, but the instructor over there, I kind of introduced him into these, like, they're called Glasgoben. They're little, like, they're points basically in soft glass that they mail to you, and you fill them with frit, and then people heat them up and then blow them. And sometimes they blow them into round things, and sometimes they blow them out, and sometimes, but they get like 10 pieces and they get to kind of play with it. So that's like a huge moneymaker for Lincoln Hot Glass. And then these snowflakes and the fused glass Christmas trees, like, I've been doing the snowflake classes for, I don't know, like 10 years or more, and people want more and more, but my time, I don't necessarily have time for it. So I've got other, students that have come into the studio that keep coming back, that then I kind of pull in and give them like little jobs if they'd like them. And they generally do, because they get to continue learning. So, like one of the girls said, I think this would make a really great class, this little fused glass Christmas tree thing. I was like, great, make some samples, because I don't really have time, but people need to be able to see that. So it's nice to be able to collaborate with other people. I think organization is key, and collaborating and working with other people is key, and trying to surround yourself with people that maybe don't necessarily have like the same political views or anything that you do, but at least have like mutually supportive attitudes, like you can work together without arguing over politics type of thing.
If you were to separate your income out, like the different ways in which you make money, how do you see that if it were a pie and maybe it changes seasonally? So like during the holidays, more classes, and during the summer, more commissions or something like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it definitely does. So like you said, it's holidays, so big class time. I run classes year round, but I don't really push them. I also travel to teach a lot, but that kind of, like a lot of that income disappeared during 2020 and 21. But I think that'll start coming back soon. So I'd say just like the traveling to teach, maybe 5%. It's not a ton, it's something that I do because I enjoy it. Then actually like making pieces for sale, that kind of depends. It really depends on where, like if I have time to actually push them in my Etsy shop, if I can post them on Instagram and spend time, like get my inventory together, post them on Instagram, then I can sell a lot of those. So it's about time to start getting fused glass hearts inventoried, so I can start getting those ready for February. Because last year that made my rent for February was the Valentine's. So it's definitely seasonal as far as what I focus on. Springtime are a lot of events. So I'll travel to events, because I also work for High Volume Oxygen. They make oxygen equipment for glass blowers. That's how I get a studio space at Lincoln Hot Glass. It's part of one of the perks that I work there. And that's why I started working there, because there was that perk of having a studio space like with a torch, which is the one bit of glass that I hadn't had access to. So yeah, month to month, you kind of think about, okay, well, Valentine's Day is coming up, so that's when I'm going to start pushing my fused glass hearts and that kind of thing. And that's my online sales. Summertime, they're like outdoor events. Like, I don't usually do art festivals, but there's one locally where we do a demo, and I'm thinking about trying to get some product together for that, because when you're demoing what you're doing, people tend to want to buy it because it's really cool. They're seeing that connection. But like I said, springtime is pretty full of events. There's the Glass Vegas event, and then Glasscraft and Bead Expo. So the Glass Vegas I'll go to as a vendor, but then the Glasscraft and Bead Expo I'll go to as an instructor. And then, then the summertime kind of opens up a little bit for me to start doing production work or experimenting with ideas that I have. And then I just try and fit, like I also have an adhesive business. So that, doesn't get a lot of my time, but I'm starting to be able to dedicate a little bit more time to that. So I would say, it might be, if you wanted to split it, I think I could maybe get like 30% with like working for other people, 30% with commissions and classes, and 30%, and then plus or minuses here and there. But it really does change seasonally. So I don't know if that helps answer the question, but yeah, there's so much to consider. And, I think we all want to work for ourselves, eventually, and that's the goal. And generally, anytime I'm working for somebody or some place, like in my head, if I can train everybody around me or like work with everybody around me in a way that makes me obsolete, then I've done my job, because then I have more time to focus on what I want to do. But it's always this kind of like, if you are going to shuffle hours and percentages of income, then you have to kind of think about that money that you're making and how you can fit it in somewhere else. Like I'm not very good at jumping headfirst into something without having a plan. I can be spontaneous, but I really don't like to not have a plan or to feel like I have to work because I'm not going to eat. Yeah.
Okay, so you have so much going on. Do you ever not feel motivated?
Oh,
Or
all the time. Yeah. I
how do
mean,
you deal with it?
especially this time of year when the light starts to disappear. So currently what I've been doing to help keep myself motivated and happy, especially when the light goes away, I've been putting up color changing LED lights in like every room. I call it like the mini Acab. So there's this artist, James Turrell, who does a bunch of light installations. And I saw one of these light installations in Vegas at one point, and it's amazing how much those colors can really affect your mood. So I've been doing that around the house. Everybody else is putting Christmas lights outside for everybody else. I'm like putting lights inside for myself. But then, I think the biggest thing is getting out of the house while it's still light out. Like if I can get out of the house and run errands or do whatever it is that I have to do before it's light out, or have a scheduled something that forces me to get out, then I can continue that momentum. So like if I'm in the house and it gets dark, I sometimes have a hard time motivating past then, it's like, all right, well, it's time to hibernate. I just want to lay down and do nothing. And sometimes I do, we do all need to take those mental health breaks where you do need to just turn off and just do nothing, and maybe do something that doesn't tax your brain, doesn't make you think, like I think the more like time goes so fast, and always, the older you get, the more responsibilities you have, and the more responsibilities you have, the more of that time disappears, so I think it's important to feel like you can be non-productive occasionally. It's not something that you want to get stuck in, but sometimes you just need that time so you can take a break from everything else that's going on and just organize your thoughts. But as far as getting motivated, sometimes you just, I don't know. Sometimes if I need to get motivated, I clean, because I need to have a clean space so that I can clear the mental clutter. If you want to get to work and your studio space is already covered, then, if you can get in a good habit. The reason I like having public studio spaces is because I know that as soon as I get there, I'm going to have room to work. My basement studio space, however, I'm not disciplined enough to say, well, if I clean this now, then it'll be ready for me with the next time, like I'm not good at, I need to become better at looking out for future Carrie, so that when I'm ready to work, I can capitalize on that moment where I'm like, yes, I want to get in the studio, instead of getting to the studio and being like, oh, I have to clean this space up. So I guess that's one way that I kind of help motivate myself, is kind of declutter my surroundings and clean things up a little bit, so that when I'm ready, I can get started.
I wanted to ask more questions about your commission work, just backpedaling a little bit. How difficult is it to design a piece and work with a customer to find something that they're happy with, that the glass is going to do? And also, how do you charge for it? You have so much time put into learning all these different techniques that can be applied to it, that how do you even begin?
Exactly. So, it's going to depend on the size and the scope of the project. And I think this is everything that we can always all get better at. And I think making sure to like kind of communicate with your fellow artists about this. Like when I go into to the studio, I can talk with the other artists that are there, and we can kind of go back and forth on the considerations of what's going into it and kind of hold each other accountable to make sure that we're actually charging enough for our time. Because a lot of times you want to say yes. You want to say yes. Maybe there's a new technique that you are working on and you want to learn that technique. So you'll say yes, but not charge as much. And I think, as long as you know that you're doing that for yourself, then that's good. But you need to make sure that once you feel comfortable with the technique, that you're actually charging for your time. And then it's also like a matter of, is this going to go in a public space? Is this going to go in a private space? Sometimes I will adjust my rate a little bit, or the amount I charge for a design, if I know it's going to go in a public space where more people will see it. And then most of the time, it's really a matter of, if a person comes to me with a commission, I understand that they have something that they want to see. But if it's not something that I'm really interested in or drawn to, I'll give it to somebody else. Because if it's not something that I feel that I can represent with my style, like I feel like if they've seen that I have a style and that's why they want me to do a commission, then that's one thing, versus somebody that just comes into the glass shop and says, well, I want this with like a lighthouse and an ocean and something like that, where it's not really something that I do. I've got a couple other people in the studio that I can say, here you go. But yeah, when you're doing commissions, there is a lot of time that goes into design. And that's one big reason that I don't like to do something if it's not something that I feel I can fit into my style, because then I spend too much time on design and I don't even know if they're going to, if they're going to like it. So if they don't like it, then I'm just wasting my time. So there's a lot to be said for sketching, which I would like to do more of, to kind of be able to come up with ideas and designs, I guess, quicker. But typically, yeah, if I'm not feeling the commission, I'll give it to somebody else. Or if I feel like it's going to take too much of my time and I can't really, I can't charge appropriately for my time unless it's something that I want to learn. And I feel like it's okay if I lose money on it, like not lose money, but not get paid for what I'm really doing, then I'll take it. But there are certain commissions where I'd much rather just say, you know what, this person would do it great, and this is the budget that you should allot for it, and there you go. And that's the other thing, is a lot of times if somebody walks in and wants to, has an idea for a commission, I have pieces at the local studio where I can show them, okay, this is this price and this is this price, and they can kind of see like, oh, well, that little piece is like $285, and I was thinking I was going to get like a big piece for $285, so I can see that that's unrealistic, kind of thing. So I think a lot of people think that it's a lot easier to do some of these techniques than maybe it is. A lot of people see the stained glass pieces that are in the shops that are, maybe made in Mexico or China, where there's no solder on the lines. The piece is gonna fall apart because it's just put together really quickly, but not really well. And a lot of people will get really attached to those things and pay to have them repaired. Whereas, if they just, if they knew what they wanted, they could get something quality. But I think a lot of people don't know what they wanted or don't know what they want specific. And a lot of, like when I first moved back to Nebraska, I found that a lot of people didn't really know what fused glass was. So they would be interested in it, but they saw a price tag that wasn't something that you'd see at Target. So that's when I decided that I really need to start educating the market around here a little bit more, so that they understood what goes into it. Because we'll have people that come into the studio and either want us to make a stained glass window or decide that they think that they could make a stained glass window. So, we'll definitely teach you how to do stained glass, and then you can work on that window. And then they start to see how much goes into it. And, we've had one lady that came in and she's like, if I only would have just paid you guys to do that, I would have saved myself so much money. But it's also because we got her hooked, so she's finding therapy in that as well, because she's a nurse, or this other guy is an engineer and they just need a way to shut their head off. So a lot of the classes are really good for helping people kind of decompress versus just having, coming in and buying a commission, because that, if you have something that you're thinking about in your house, you can totally go in and get it done.
So my next question is that do you think that people treat you differently because you're a woman? And like the three different categories I can think of, like potential clients or potential students, and also like do you feel like the glass community treats you differently because you're a woman?
So there are certain people that are always going to treat you differently because you're a woman. And I'd say the most, like, just as an example of this overall, is students that continue to come back to the local studio where I work. It's mostly women, and there's a certain kind of guy that can continue to come back. But I think as an instructor, a lot of guys, especially like in a construction type orientation, because stained glass, you're building things, you're grinding, you're soldering, you're putting things together. And I think it certainly takes a certain mindset to be able to take instruction from somebody else. But I think specifically a lot of older men have a hard time taking direction from a woman because they feel like, well, I can do this. I don't really need this class, but I'm doing this with my wife or something, kind of something like that. So yes, I can see that in classes. Sometimes that happens. And I mean, really, I think it just depends person to person. I think we're starting to get beyond the whole like toxic masculinity timeline, with everything that's happened in the last few years. But there's still certainly some like guerrilla type attitudes out there, but I think really it's going to vary from person to person. I'm lucky that, the people that I surround myself with, I don't really run into that problem, but I could certainly see where, depending on where you are and who's been working in the studio, like if you as a woman walk into a studio where they've been a whole bunch of guys for X number of years and now suddenly there's a woman, the way that they joke is probably going to be inappropriate because they're used to hanging out with guys that do the whole thing, but I can't say that I've really experienced it. I'm sure there are. I used to work in the hospitality business, so a lot of that I'll just kind of brush it off, and like I just let it kind of hit me and wash off if there was something that maybe was, I guess, maybe inappropriate, or I kind of tend to be forgiving when people say something that they probably shouldn't say, but I don't take it personally. So I guess really I haven't had that experience so much, but I've certainly heard about it, and I can understand why it exists, because social norms are always evolving, and I guess as a culture and society, we've started to become much more accountable for actions and words.
I like that way of putting it, being accountable for what you say.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a long time period where, I mean, even going up, I mean, I feel like taking it to the political level, like the person in our country that's supposed to be the most accountable and responsible is typically the president, right? And I think we went through a long time period where accountability was just out the window. And it kind of became the norm to not be responsible for your actions, not be accountable for your words or your behaviors or anything, like you could just say one thing and mean another, or,
I was wondering, because you do so many commission works, how do you handle, maybe more so internally, when a customer has a different type of vision of what the finished product should be?
So generally there are some revisions that happen, maybe, but I guess if you can learn to explain the way that you're thinking about the project that you're working on and why you're thinking about doing what you're doing, sometimes you find kind of a meeting in the middle, like then people start to understand what's going on. Like this, I had a really big mosaic project this last fall. I worked with another artist out of Puerto Vallarta, Nat Moraga, and I had such a great time. It was kind of a community project / commission. So we were able to kind of like we took input from the community on what they wanted to see for this project, but then we really had a lot of freedom to develop what we wanted to. So we worked on it in stages, and it came together really quickly because it had to. We gave ourselves a really short time frame to get it all finished. So there were definitely compromises, but then was a lot of discussion that went into, like why we were thinking the way that we were thinking and what we wanted. There was definitely a story, there was a story that we were able to tell, and it made sense to us. So it made it easier to talk to other people about it so that they could kind of understand what was going on and why. But some other commissions, it's base, it can be basic stuff. We had a commission that came into the studio. There was a lady that wanted a longhorn cattle stained glass window. So, you come up with the design and you present it to her, and then maybe she thinks, well, the horns need to be longer. So you make the horns longer. It's like, before you start cutting glass, you certainly get approval and you color it in as much as you can and make the customer understand that these pigments aren't going to match what the glass does. So there's going to be a little bit, it's going to be different. So you kind of prepare them for that in the first place. But I think typically, before I start actually making anything, it's just having those conversations and getting an idea with the client of what they want. If they don't know what they want, then it kind of falls on you to dig and ask those questions or show them examples from your portfolio that, well, I was thinking about this, or, even going on Google and saying, okay, well, you want a longhorn cow is from the side, from the front, like what are you thinking, and what's going to make you happy? But, like you just need to get some kind of an idea. If you have a customer that comes in and they want a commission, but they can't fully explain what they want, as long as they're easygoing and they don't care what they get, as long as it fits, like, well, I like blue and I want it to have a windmill. If those are the only two parameters and they really don't care, then it's much easier until you find out that, oh, well, we've included this color and we've included a windmill, but now I think it should add, have this or this or this. It's a lot of times it's editing down what the client wants because they have all these ideas and they want to cram them all in the box. And it doesn't always work like that. So if you can edit down those ideas and find out what's most important to them and how we represent that, and maybe even kind of start thinking abstractly with them, if they can. Not everybody can think in the abstract. So if you can help them get there, sometimes that works. But I guess I haven't really ever had, don't want to say this, jinx myself or anything, but I don't think that I've really ever had a commission where the person was really expecting something and it didn't come out, like I think I'm a perfectionist enough that if the design doesn't turn out quite like I want, I won't even present it to them. But yeah, it's really a bunch of, sketching an idea, getting to them, getting feedback, and then going on from there. But a lot of times if you can nail down what exactly it is that they want, then there isn't a whole bunch of going back to revise what's going on. So, you got to think about size, you got to think about medium, you got to think about budget. Like, are you wanting a window? Are you wanting something that hangs on your wall? Or is it an award? Is it a gift? Is it something that's going to be wearable? Is it, there's so many things to consider. And if you can just get all of those considerations down initially, because then beyond that, then you have to think about your materials and your time. And so you're the only person that's going to know how long it takes you to do whatever. For example, at the stained glass studio, when they're doing commissions, they sat down and they timed themselves. How long does it take us to do the copper foil method with 12, 10 pieces or whatever, so it's like, all right, they'll count the pieces. There's 10 pieces. They can do 12 in an hour to finish the thing. So that's how they kind of set their price on those. That's kind of similar to what I want to do. I'd like to do more mosaic installations, but I need to time myself with different styles so that I can actually give a hard number versus kind of a guesstimate. Because a lot of times I will come to pricing just by walking it through in my head, thinking about the materials that I need, thinking about how much time it might take me, and then kind of a shot in the dark that becomes close-ish, and then kind of work with it from there. Like, okay, well, I can give you an about-ish budget, and then we can work within those parameters to get closer to what it is that you're really looking for. Does that help?
Totally.
Yeah.
It's a good way to think about it.
Communication.
Communication. Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally.
absolutely.
And also like knowing like if it's not your style, passing it off, just knowing that up front.
Yeah. If I already know that it's something that just doesn't sound like fun, I'm in a position that I don't have to take it. So if it doesn't sound like fun to me and I know somebody that could do it better than me, I will absolutely give it to them, because I've got, 2 studios worth of people here. So if it's a blown glass something, I know I can give it to this person, because I certainly can't do a repair or anything blown glass by myself at this point. There are a few things I can do on the torch that I'm comfortable with. There are a few things that I can do in the furnace, but it's not my area of expertise. I've worked far longer in the warm glass studio with stained glass and mosaics. So, but then beyond that, if it's something that somebody wants that's highly stylized, like a portrait, that is not my strong suit. So there's another girl in the studio that does a lot of portraits, and I will always give those to her because she has a lot more experience and she can make it look good. If I had, I'd love to have more time. I'd love to be able to stop time and work on that. There are several things that I'd like to be able to work more in, but I've got a lot of things that I juggle. So I just, focus on what I can get done in the moment. And then eventually, I'll get to that point if I feel like I need to add that to my toolbox. But in the meantime, I've got other people that I can team up with and, support them.
Cool.
Do you have anything that you'd like to end on, or anything you want to make sure that people that are listening hear?
If you'd like to check out more of my work, I've got a couple of different Instagram accounts. I've got my Calyx and Instagram account, and that is kind of my personal account. But I also have a kids in class account, and I segregate that so that, if young kids want to follow me, they can follow me there and not see anything that might be potentially inappropriate on my, personal artist account. My webpage is Calyx Glass, and that's, constantly trying to update that and get, the portfolio section updated. I do a lot of teaching in schools. We didn't really talk about that much at all because I haven't been doing that with the 2021 thing, but I think that'll come back more in 2022. Hopefully, we'll see. But I've got a lot of kids projects there that I've worked on in schools. You can kind of see some of the commission progress and like commission / collaboration that I do with the kids in the schools. Yeah, I think that's everything.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Connected in Glass. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more information on the artists we interview and for updates on the podcast.